We're excited to see everyone here today in our Women in Global Health Seattle quarterly gathering. If you'd like to, please share your name and organization in the chat so that we can see who's present today. And please also take some time to fill out the survey linked in the chat. This is so that we could gather data on our Women in Global Health Seattle chapter membership, and that will help us ensure additional funding for the chapter. This survey was created by Hannah Samet, who is our graduate student at the University of Washington, working with us and has joined us today on this call as well. So welcome, Hannah. And now I'd like to pass the mic to Women in Global Health Seattle Advisor Patience Kumba for our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Fatima. Hi, everyone. And before we begin our program, let's take a moment to ground ourselves and respectfully acknowledge the land that where we are today. For those of us in Seattle area, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish, past and present. If you're joining us from elsewhere in the United States, we invite you to learn more about the tribal land in which you occupy by visiting the link in the chat. I believe it's been sent in the chat. And truly commit through words and actions to demonstrate respect for the rights of the true owners and caretakers of these lands. And now I'd like to pass the mic back to Fatima to introduce our speaker for today's event. Thanks, Fatima.
Thank you, Patience. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. Thank you again. I am honored to be your host for this evening, where we gather to discuss a topic of utmost significance, menstrual equity. I'm Fatima Al-Shimari, and we have the privilege today of hearing from a remarkable speaker, April Haberman, who is an expert in the field of menstrual equity. April brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion, focusing on an area that has long been overlooked and misunderstood. And as we delve into the vital conversation surrounding menstrual equity, April's presentation promises to shed light on the challenges and opportunities in ensuring that menstruation is not a barrier, but rather a fundamental aspect of gender equity in global health. Her insights will undoubtedly inspire us to rethink the way we approach this critical issue. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce and invite April to take the virtual stage and share her expertise on menstrual equity. Thank you for being part of this important conversation, and let's embark on a journey towards greater understanding and action on this topic.
Thanks so much, Fatima. I really appreciate the warm introduction, and thank you for having me speak today. I'm excited to actually be on this side of the table. I've been with the Women Global Health Seattle for about a year now, and I'm excited to talk about menstrual equity and how that relates to gender equity overall. And I'd really love to look at the what and the why behind it with this presentation at the front end of our conversation today, and then come off of PowerPoint and share in a fireside chat with a Q&A. Feel free to put questions in the chat if you have those. And then really to look at the how. I'd love to leave you with some action steps. And my aim here is to leave you with key insights so that all of us can promote menstrual equities within our local communities. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Why are we talking about menstruation? What does that have to do with gender equity? In the 21st century, with all of our advances in economic might, it's still estimated that over 500 million women and girls around the world, that's 25% of those of reproductive age, don't have what they need to manage their periods with health, dignity, and safety. And I just like to pause here for a moment and let that sink in. 25% is the total population of North America, Canada, and Mexico. And if you think about the US alone with our economic might, to still have that many women and girls that don't have what they need to manage their periods is pretty astounding. And I'm going to actually ask you to do me a favor right now. I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes for just a moment. And I want you to picture your mother or your daughter, maybe a sister, or even a friend or a neighbor. And I want you to imagine that she didn't have or doesn't have what she needs to manage her period. Ask yourself, what would she do? Would she tear up rags? Would she cut up a blanket, a t-shirt? Would she take toilet paper and stuff it in her underwear? Maybe she would stay home from work or skip school for the duration of her period. And then ask yourself how many days per year she would lose in education or wages simply because she didn't have anything to manage her period. And I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. I walk you through that exercise because it really brings it home. On average, women menstruate 3,000 days in their lifetime, and that's a total of 8 years or more that we're menstruating. And if we don't have what we need to manage our periods, many of those days are lost or critically impacted. And this impact, it really impacts performance, presenteeism at work. It puts girls behind in school. And if we're absent or negatively affected because of our absenteeism at school, it puts us behind in comparison to male colleagues or classmates. And the other thing to understand is that this issue really has no boundaries. It affects women and girls all over the world, from our own backyard to remote villages in developing countries. It's a problem that goes unnoticed, that is oftentimes shoved under the rug, or is just simply not talked about. And yet the impact is far, far reaching. Now, I just mentioned that this topic is far reaching and that it does affect all countries, globally speaking. But we still have this misnomer that menstrual inequity and not having access to period products is really something that's left for developing countries, and it simply isn't the truth. Menstrual inequity is a universal experience. Even here in the United States, women and girls face challenges related to menstruation. I'll give you an example. I still work with a nonprofit organization, Days for Girls. And when I started with Days for Girls 10 years ago, it was in a volunteer role. And I had started one of the first Days for Girls chapters in Edmonds, Washington. And if you're familiar with Washington State at all, you know that Edmonds, Washington is middle class. Typically, people don't think about homeless girls being within the school district. And that's simply not the truth either. 10 years ago, we had 200 homeless girls within the school district who didn't have what they needed to manage their periods. And I started the chapter in Edmonds, Washington as a means to an end to get them period products so that they weren't missing school, so that they could stay in school and participate. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm still collecting disposable products for the now over 400 girls that are homeless or on free and reduced lunch. So this is a universal problem. In fact, 84% of teenage girls in one US survey stated that they had either missed class time themselves or they knew someone that missed class time because they didn't have access to menstrual products. And then moreover, there's about 20% of teenage girls that are living in poverty, and they're really extremely vulnerable to the challenges around menstruation. And it has a negative effect on them. And if you think about menstrual equity, we often think about girls missing school, but menstrual inequity goes far beyond the classroom, and it's an issue that affects all aspects of a woman's life. In one 2023 study, it stated that 31% of respondents used makeshift period products like stuffing toilet paper in their underwear at work. So this is affecting women as much as it is girls trying to go to school. And we have to remember here too that if someone has a choice in purchasing period products or paying for rent and food are always going to win. So I just mentioned not having access to menstrual products, but the question here is, what if no one ever taught her about menstruation? What if she was meant or taught to believe cultural taboos and myths that leave her ashamed about her body? That's the situation for millions of girls around the world. And in some parts of the world, that situation is far more serious and disturbing than we can even imagine. This picture here, it's a picture of a young girl in the remote foothills of Western Nepal. And in this area, they practice, they have a cultural practice that is called chapati. And chapati banishes women and girls for the duration of their period to cowsheds, mud huts, or even open fields, which exposes them to life-threatening elements and causes them unbearable shame. This is a picture of one of those mud huts. We have seen some women and girls that have actually died because they've left to be out in the open to this exposure. This extreme form of discrimination is also deeply rooted in misconceptions of menstruation as being impure or unhealthy or bad luck. And it's passed down from generation to generation. So you can imagine how hard and difficult it is to break those cultural taboos. This is a picture of one of those huts being dismantled. The practice of chapati was outlawed in Nepal in 2005, but the practice still is pretty prevalent in rural communities. Oftentimes, these rural communities don't have the education or the knowledge to understand why the huts are being torn down. So even if the government comes in and tears them down, they'll come back in and rebuild them. So the education and relationships with women and men in communities to break down these cultural taboos is really important. For example, Maya, who is the country director for Days for Girls in Nepal, has worked years and years in building those relationships so that she can come in and educate and help the communities actually tear down some of these huts. Let's look at Kenya, for example. Let's go around the world. In Kenya, we have an enterprise leader with Days for Girls. Her name is Christine. And Christine used to use leaves and rags to manage her period and often stained through her clothing because she couldn't afford menstrual products. And when a religious leader offered to give her pads in exchange for sex, she felt like she had no other choice. And so she agreed to that. And at age 14, she found herself pregnant and homeless on the streets of Nairobi, Kenya. All because she didn't have what she needed to manage her period. And like Christine, millions of people who menstruate face similar challenges. In one study in Kenya, it showed that 65% of women and girls couldn't afford to purchase any type of disposable product. And 2 out of 3 women stated that they had received pads from sexual partners. So you can imagine that this dynamic places women and girls at risk for unwanted early pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, and interpartner violence. The world is realizing the cost of ignoring menstrual health is too high. As I just mentioned, it leads to health complications that early childhood marriage, gender-based violence, transactional sex, difficulty concentrating in school or attending school or work, and leads to extreme stigma and shame, even isolation, as we just saw in Nepal. The lack of access to menstrual health education also has negative consequences that include that perpetuation of stigmas and taboos, misinformation, and harmful cultural and hygiene practices. So you can see the negative consequences of not having access to menstrual products or menstrual health education. It's far and wide. But this is so much more than just providing pads. Meeting the tangible needs for her is the first step. And we can talk about some of the longer term solutions in just a moment. But the question here is really, why is this important? Why? And there we go. So let's go a little bit deeper here. I want to side note a little bit. I've been somewhat setting the stage here about the global issue that's impacting the 500 million women and girls around the world, to make you aware of how lack of supportive menstrual health environments impact girls at school and at work. But I want to shift our focus now from the 500 million to an overlooked group of people, the 700 million, including many of the people that are in your own workplace who can afford period products, but they often find themselves in unexpected or uncomfortable situations. So let's look at menstrual equity at work as well as within our healthcare system. I'm gonna take us on a little detour here, because we can't talk about menstruation at work without including the conversation in menopause. Menopause is seeing a lot more buzz these days with Oprah and some of the other actors and actresses that are talking about it. But when we look at women's health span, we consider menarche through menopause, which is the ceasing of menstruation. And there is a wide range of personal experiences within this menstrual health span, each one unique to each individual. Some women have difficulty with their menstruation, such as endometriosis, PCOS, painful periods. Some have trouble with fertility, and then even others have great challenges navigating perimenopause, which is the state leading up to the menopause, which is the ceasing of menstruation. And I want to show you this graph here to help you understand this a little bit more. The average age of reaching menopause is 51, and that's for white women. It's younger or earlier for different ethnic groups. The average age of reaching perimenopause is 41. Perimenopause can last anywhere from 2 to 12 years, with an average of about 7 years, and is typically the most challenging for women to manage, because this is when you see the greatest fluctuation in hormones. It can really be like a roller coaster, and there are up to 34 symptoms that can present, including that heavy flooding, bleeding, irregular periods, which is typically the first sign that someone is going into perimenopause. So suffice it to say, if we look at menstrual equity, we have to fold in menopause in that conversation, because women experience challenges during this difficult time frame in their lives. And if we discuss menstrual equity at work, we have to consider the whole menstrual health span from menarche to menopause as well. So let's look at a few statistics here. Women ages 50 plus are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace right now. 81% of US women aged 45 to 54 are in paid employment, and many are in leadership roles and at the height of their career. 1 in 4 women consider leaving work due to menopausal symptoms. And I'm actually down here in California at a women's health summit, and I stand corrected on this statistic. I always like to give accurate information, and it is now 1 in 5, according to a recent study with Forbes. So 1 in 5 women consider leaving the workplace due to menopause-related symptoms. 1 in 10 actually leave work. 14% decrease their hours to part-time, and 8% don't put their name in a hat for a promotion. 9 out of 10 survey respondents reported feeling anxiety and stress in the workplace due to periods, and 63% of respondents admitted to feeling embarrassed talking about menstruation or periods in the workplace. So if we look at just that age range of 45 to 54 alone, again, we're talking about a time in a woman's life where they are at the height of their career. They're ready to give more to their careers. Perhaps they're empty nesters now, or they have teenagers that are much more independent. And what we don't want to happen is to lose that talent. It's a great loss for everyone, not just the employers. And if we want to advance gender equity in global health leadership and across all industries, you can see why menstrual equity plays a huge role in this. Menstrual equity is a huge part of gender equity. So let's shift our focus again and look at healthcare as it relates to menstrual equity. First, I just want to say that there is extremely little funding for women's health. Less than 10% of funding through NIH is allocated for women's health, and yet we make up for half of the world's population. For shame, this needs to change. There's a lot still to be learned about women's health, and there's a lot of misinformation out there as it relates to women's health. So it's important to note that we need more funding here. The good news is that the White House just announced a new initiative to do just that. In addition, most healthcare practitioners receive very, very little training in school as it relates to women's health and specifically menopausal health. There are, we were just talking about this in a breakout session today, and I'm going to give you these statistics. Only 20% of OBs that are in residency receive specific menopausal training, 20% of OBs, and yet this is where most women are referred for menopausal assistance, and 1,500 MDs specialize in menopausal care, and yet there are over 1 billion women that are going through this stage right now and trying to manage the heavy flooding, bleeding, and irregular periods without that support and health care. So this just means that ensuring that healthcare is accessible and equitable is an important next step for us. If you consider, I'd like to give you actually an example here. If you consider an individual that is experiencing heavy flooding, bleeding, what we often see is that she's going to have a hard time trying to find a healthcare practitioner that she likes, that she relates to, that can help her navigate those symptoms. And then let's just say, for example, that she decides that she wants to take HRT, hormone replacement therapy, or we call it menopause hormone therapy now, MHT. It's one and the same. Let's say that she wants that as a treatment. Finding the right medication and dose, as well as how she wants to take that medication, transdermal or oral, can be challenging. And then it takes time for that particular medication to work. You have to give it time to work, while all at the same time, we still have this individual that is experiencing heavy flooding, bleeding while she's at work and trying to manage that. So again, menstrual inequity plays a huge role in gender equity and advancing women in leadership roles. If we can't manage our periods at work, how are we supposed to work? So you can see here that menopause and menstruation are complicated. It is much more than just access to a pad. There isn't one singular solution for every single individual. It's not a linear path for us, and yet there are a lot of options out there and available to explore that support menstrual equity, creating that healthier, safer, and more dignified world. Menstrual equity is a matter of a human right, according to the UN, and we need to continue the conversation so that we can begin to look at adequate solutions, accessible solutions for all women. So I'm actually going to stop share now so that we can begin our fireside chat. All right.
Thank you so much, April. I definitely learned a lot from your presentation. And I have a few questions that we had as well to get us started. You mentioned why it's important to talk about menstrual equity as well as what menstrual equity is. And let's talk about specific action steps we can take to support and advocate for menstrual equity. Would you mind sharing a few actionable steps with us?
Sure. I have a lot of information that I'd like to share, but I think first kicking it off to say we have to continue conversations like this. So thank you so much for bringing to light this important topic. We're not going to advance menstrual equity if we don't have conversations like this. We have to open it up around menstruation and menopause to create a more inclusive environment so that people are talking about this without embarrassment and shame. We all need to be able to say menstruation, periods, menopause without being embarrassed, and we can begin to normalize those conversations. We also need to create cultures that value women and seasoned employees. Women in midlife have a lot to offer, and we need to be willing to treat women as humans who are experiencing a very normal biological change. Second, we need to educate. I'm a huge fan of education. As you saw in the presentation, lack of education can lead to menstrual inequity and health ramifications and consequences in a great way. But there's also a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of myths that need to be shattered. And by educating, we build that inclusive environment for everyone, and we begin to understand how menstrual and menopausal health affects everyone, not just those that are experiencing the physical effects of it. Education, I think, looks like education for consumers as well as for businesses. So we have two different camps, both needing different types of education, some of the same overlapping education. It's important to understand things like not all women experience menopause and menstruation the same, as I mentioned earlier in my slideshow. You can also consider the fact that you don't have to be old to be in menopause. If you're experiencing early menopause, that means that you can experience it as early as 12 years of age. So understanding the full picture is important. Take into consideration as well that you can actually go full blown into menopause if it's surgically induced, for example. So education is really important. I think third, we need to support menstrual health and menopause within organizations, creating menstrual and menopausal friendly environments. And so we hear this often, you need to be a menstrual friendly employer or menopause friendly employer, but we don't really know what that means. So what we need to begin to do is educate, right? What does that look like? And now what do we need to do? So that might be things like accommodations, for example. So do you have access? Do all women have access to restrooms? Do they have access to menstrual products? Are hand washing stations available? We need to consider all industries. So we often think about, office environments, right? Corporate environments. But what about the trades? What about women that are steel workers or construction workers? Where do they go to the bathroom? Is there a honey bucket available? Is there hand sanitizer in there for her? And then what about breaks, right? Some of the other accommodations that we can begin to look at are adequate breaks. Are we giving adequate breaks so that she has time to go change her pad or change her clothes if she's bled through? Do you have a space for her to do that? And still allow her that adequate time to go get water or fresh air like anyone else that's not experiencing their periods at that time. Uniforms can be another thing to consider. If someone's going through perimenopause, she might not just have that heavy flooding, bleeding, and irregular periods, but maybe she's experiencing hot flashes. So do you have good temperature within your work environment? Can you have lighter fabric for those uniforms? And then, you can go even beyond that and look at leave, menstrual leave, menopause leave. Other countries outside of the US are far ahead of us in advances like this and offering that time off for employees. Policies, Fatima, we can look at policies within organizations. I think this is a much broader picture than just checking the box or saying, yes, I'm menstrual friendly or menopause friendly and popping a badge out on your website. I think we have to look at workplace policies as well. Put it in writing so that it doesn't go away, that you don't have an employee resource group that is championing this, or women's group that's championing this, and then you have pads in a bathroom, but they're not there next year because those individuals move on, or leave the organization, for example. So we need to put a stake in the ground and make sure that we have policies in place that say, hey, I see you, and we're creating this environment to support you because we don't want to lose you in the workplace. The policies can include setting or training advocates, for example. Maybe it's the employee resource group leaders, maybe it's an HR leader, but having someone that is fully trained, fully understands the breadth of that menstrual health span, so that there's a safe place and a safe person for employees to go to, I think is extremely important. And I know I'm long-winded here, but I also just want to take a side note here and mention that there is the social responsibility piece that we've mentioned. It's the right thing to do, but there's also a very strong business case, as you saw with the statistics, and a legal case. That can be a whole conversation in and of itself, and we haven't seen legal cases being brought forth here in the US, but certainly we have seen this in other countries like the UK, where tribunals are being brought forth and they're being won and women are being paid out. So I think that we have to consider the legal case as well. There are laws in the US that don't specifically protect women in the menstrual health or menopause health space, but there's overarching laws that can protect, like Title IX and Family Leave Act, for example, and you're beginning to hear a little bit more buzz relative to the legal case as well. So I'll stop there.
Wow. There's definitely a lot that I learned from that, and especially in things that I don't really think about often. I have my office job. I'm not going the extra mile to think about women who wear uniforms to work or whether they have enough breaks. And even just as a woman who advocates for, us to have, pads in the workplace and us to be able to take breaks when we're experiencing discomfort and pain, is that I never really thought of these as points of menstrual equity. So I really appreciate you bringing those up, April. And it kind of leads me to my next question, which is, where do you see the greatest disparity with menstrual equity?
It's a good question. And there's disparity everywhere. I want to just note that first and foremost, but the greatest disparity, hands down, is in developing countries. We're fortunate in the US that the majority of us have access to menstrual products, or we at least have nonprofits that are filling that gap. But I've been all over the world, and I'm just here to say it's definitely developing countries. And I think I noted this earlier in my presentation. The tangible need that we meet by distributing pads, tampons, whatever that product is definitely needed. But the education is really where we see the most significant advances, when we can go out in the field and we can give adequate health information so that she understands what is normal and what's not normal. She knows when to go seek help if she needs it. And she's also able to celebrate her body, and she sees that menstruation is just a normal biological change and transition that's happening. And she gets to celebrate that. And some of the most beautiful moments, if I can just share here, that are just really not just etched in my memory, but etched in my heart, it's that sticky heart, is gathering with women under trees and having conversations about menstruation and menopause and educating them and watching them walk away with their shoulders a little higher, a little swing in their step. And I know that that ripple effect is going to happen. They're going back to their communities, and they're going to tell someone, and they're going to tell someone, and that's where the real change happens, is in the education.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing the story. Um, I did want to say that the menstrual space is growing and there are more options available for menstrual management than ever before. So what are some of the products that our audience may not be aware of?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And there's so many products that are available. I wish they were available when I was still having my period. We're very familiar with the disposable products. We can go into any drugstore or grocery store, and there are 500 products to choose from. What we do have now, more so than we had just even a few years ago in the disposable category, is organic options. There are so many other options out there in that category that are better for our bodies, that don't have chemicals, don't have perfumes in them. So certainly disposables are still around, but there's a wide variety of disposables. We also have the washable pads. There are a lot of for-profit organizations that have washable pads, and they're quite comfortable. My daughter used washable pads at night to give her body a break from the disposables. They're comfortable. They're better for your body. They save money. You don't have to buy the disposables every month. You just wash them and reuse them, and they look cute. There's a lot of options that look cute too. We like our undergarments to look matchy, and why not have our washable pads pretty too, right? And then there are your period panties. There's a host of companies that now have the period panties, which are a wonderful option. Some allow you to use them all day. Some you change every 3 to 4 hours, like you change your pads or your tampons. I know as my daughter grew up, she had a pair of the period panties every day of her period, and she probably still uses them during her period. Because she felt safer. When she played sports for years and years in junior high and high school, and she would wear the period panties as backup because when you're guest players and you're wearing the white shorts on the soccer field in Seattle and it's pouring down rain, the last thing you want is to leak through on your underwear, and those period panties afforded her the opportunity to have that backup. So they're a wonderful option, and there are also, again, a host of options out there. And then there's cups. There's menstrual cups. They've been around for a number of years as well, but the variety and the options in that category are even greater and wider as well, and they're much more comfortable. If you're not familiar with the cup, it's medical grade plastic. It lasts 10 years, so they're definitely better for the earth and cost savings with the menstrual cups. But it just fills with your menstrual fluid, and you take it out, dump it, and insert it back in and sterilize it at the end of your menstrual cycle. So menstrual cups have come a long way as well. We're just very fortunate that we have so many options to manage our periods now. There's something for everyone, and choice is definitely, we definitely have choice.
Thank you, April. I'm going to start asking you questions that our lovely team has pulled from the chat. So thank you, Michelle, for helping us get those questions. Our first question comes from Asiatu Diallo, and she says, April, can we have the source for the infographic you shared earlier around 4:21 p.m.? Would like to share with our DEI team.
Yes, I will look back at that. And I know we're sending out a resource sheet for you with a lot of links at the end with some of those statistics. I'm not sure which one you're referring to, so I'll go back and make sure that I get the correct information for you. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have another comment from Alina Robertson. Excellent and very insightful talk, April. Women's health will be one of the WGHA Global Health Innovation Exchange strategic areas in 2024. So what do you think about that? That's exciting.
Very
Um,
exciting. Yes, we actually had, as I'm here in the summit, if I could side note, we had someone here speaking from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation today and was talking through the 2024 initiatives and gender equity and women's health. And the focus on that is just really exciting. I'm super excited, for a lack of a better way of saying that, on what's coming from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the collaborative efforts that are beginning to happen. I wish everyone could be here at the summit to see the buzz and the collaboration that's happening. And that's something that's changing. We were siloed for so long and everybody doing their own thing. And what we're beginning to see is that we can't just look at women's health in that siloed manner anymore with blinders on. If we're going to make significant strides and changes, we have to do it in a collaborative way, and it's beginning to happen.
Definitely. Definitely.
Can I make a comment, please, Fatima?
Of course.
So April, so the one thing I'm very happy to hear as well is that you're talking about menopause. Because just to give you an example, when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry in South Africa, I had a meeting with a woman in a township in Soweto Township, and it was the most incredible. These women are all ex-nurses or women who's social workers, etc., and they formed this group that so that women can come and talk there. And there, what I found out is that they are women, African women, and obviously not all African women, but in general, African women is not really allowed to show menopause because then they are infertile.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not allowed to talk to it, and they even fake menstruation. And that actually has been an incredible, it's something that I've always been thinking about. And therefore, I've decided that day, I will talk about menopause and menstruation and all of those things. And for me, who's a postmenopausal or in real menopause, I can tell you it's interesting the insight you're coming up with, because you often want just a fridge that you can put your head into when you are working in a company.
Yes. Yes.
Job.
Yes, you do, Elena, and it's a topic that really does need to be folded into menstrual health. And I think this goes back to what I just said about looking at the full menstrual health span, if you want to call it that, menarche to menopause. The misnomer is that menopause is for old women. And if you Google menopause right now, any one of us Googled menopause images, most often than not, what you're going to see is an image of an old white woman fanning herself with a hot flash. And that's
Exactly.
simply not the case. And that perimenopause stage starts in late 30s, 40s, and it's a large portion of our lives, if you think about it. And that heavy flooding, bleeding, and the irregular periods, and on top of all of the other symptoms that you're having, is very, very difficult to manage. And it is affecting women in the workplace as well as at home. And I think what's also important to note is that it affects everyone, not just the individual that is experiencing it. If you've ever slept next to someone that's having night sweats, you know that you're experiencing sleep disturbances as well, or heavy flooding, bleeding, without getting into details. But that's a serious symptom. And anyone that's experienced that knows that it's not just changing your pad, it's changing everything. And you can't leave your home sometimes. So there are women that are having to quit their jobs and leave their jobs because they can't manage through this. And that has to change. If we want to advance women in leadership roles, we have to figure out how to bring equitable, affordable healthcare to everyone. We're starting to see a lot more telehealth, femtech health organizations launching that are looking at that full menstrual health span from menarche to menopause, including fertility, pregnancy, lactation, everything, postpartum care, menopause. However, a lot of those femtech health organizations are more boutique, and therefore insurance doesn't pay for all of those. So you have inequity there, and that has to change as well. So there's advocacy that has to happen over here on the side as well. We have to begin to change legislation and work with insurance companies, and the list goes on. Really, we could talk for hours on this, but yeah, back to menstrual equity. Fatima,
Thank you.
sorry.
I see that we do have another audience member who has a hand raised. Marcia.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the topic. I do and board member for WGH. But I wanted to just add to the topic as well. My own personal experience with, I turned 50 this year, but just on the whole menopause and flooding discussion. And I really, didn't know what to expect, but my health issues seemed to really, really take a turn when I got my vaccine. And I don't know if it was just a coincidence. My doctor maintains that it was a coincidence, but I've talked to other women who had similar. And it's just an area that I think more research needs to be done. And I just thought out, and I feel like feel like I'm a voice in the night, kind of talking to different people and hearing the same thing. And it really concerns me. But yeah, just thought I'd bring that up here. Thank you.
Yeah, Marcia, I think that more research needs to be done everywhere in women's health. And back to that statistic of less than 10% of funding goes to women's health research needs to change. And I will say that the majority of that 10% of that research funding is in parenting. So it's not even in menstrual health, menopausal health. So we do have a lot of work to be done there. But I think that someone posted the White House initiative link in chat as well. So everyone has the link to that. There's good news coming, really good news coming.
Thank you, April. We have an anonymous question. Are menstrual products still taxed in Washington?
They are. Mm-hmm. So write your legislators. Yeah, they are.
Definitely will be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we need that to change. We don't need tampon tax anywhere in any state, and that is beginning to change. But write your legislators if you want that to change. And then I'll also note here, because we are still gathering disposable products for just the Edmonds School District. We've been doing that for 10 years. Legislation did change in 2023, and all schools are supposed to be providing free period products for students by the end of this year. We only have a couple weeks left. We're still collecting disposable products and distributing them to schools. So I just want everybody to be aware of that as well. So write your legislators. That needs to change.
Definitely. Thank you, April. We have a question from Michelle. I'm curious to see what you'd like to see the White House initiative on women's health research focus regarding menstrual equity. How might government, philanthropy, and the private sector work together to address these issues?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I promise I won't get long-winded here. I'll give you a simple answer. Actually, it's not so simple, but having worked in nonprofit and still working with a nonprofit, Days for Girls, in this space, and also owning my own startup company in menopause, I see both sides. And I think that your private sector and your nonprofit sector do need to come together. I think more corporations need to support nonprofits in this space, and they need to allow more funding for overhead. It's not sexy to pay for rent or staffing or, fill in the blank, lights, the printer, but nonprofits need that if they're going to continue the work that they do. And we need to stop mandating that impact reports have results on how many girls are reached, how many women are reached. We don't know. We don't know. And we really end up with the handcuffs on when we don't have funding that allows us to just go out and do the work that we're doing. So we need to change that. I think that as far as the White House is concerned and the research that needs to be had, I'm also putting a link to menopause mandate for you in the resource doc that will come your way after this call. Menopause mandate, you can look that up, Menopause Mandate US. There's a lot of influential people that are working on a menopause mandate that will then work alongside the White House to ensure that there's funding in women's health, specifically in menstrual health and menopause health space. So you can take a look at that. There's ways that you can get involved as well, but I will stop there and take more questions if we have them. That's just a start.
It sounds like a start in the right direction. So thank you for sharing that. We have a question from Hannah. How has menstrual equity for incarcerated individuals been a part of this conversation? I just found out that incarcerated folks had to buy their own period products in prisons until very recently and was shocked.
That's a good question. And that is the case, Hannah, in some places. It's not the case everywhere. Even in Washington State, I'm pleased to say that Purdy Women's Correctional Facility, they have what they need. There's no need. They get as many pads as they need to manage their periods, but not all correctional facilities are created equal. So you're correct. That's the case in some areas. Sometimes women get one pad for the duration of their period. And oftentimes you see that transactional sex in return for pads as well. It's changing, but again, it's twofold. You have to work with your government legislation, right, to advocate and change that. We have to use our voices and make sure that we're asking for that, not just incarcerated women. And then we have to make sure that we're supporting them with education through nonprofits or volunteerism. We've been to many prison systems around the world that we support with nonprofits with the washable pads so that they don't have to worry about the disposable pads and how many they get and whether or not they have to buy them. So I think we can get creative with our solutions. Maybe it's not disposables then, right? Maybe it's the washable pads. Maybe it's the menstrual cup that we distribute to some of those correctional facilities. But also remember that this issue is also like an onion that we just continue to peel back layer after layer after layer. I'm going to give you for example, if we give some of the washable, we call them kits because they include pads and panties and washcloths and other things, but let's just say washable pads. If we give washable pads in correctional facilities, they often get stolen because other people want them, right? So there's that challenge as well. So what do you do about that? It's not healthy to be using somebody else's washable pads, whether they've been washed or not. So there's a health issue, but there's also that theft, and now you have violence in the correctional facilities. So it really is a complicated issue, but we're working on it.
Definitely. Thank you. We have a question from Patience K. I'm curious to know more about the accessibility of menstrual cups in low and middle income countries. Much as they are more sustainable, what are the challenges in cleaning and storing them in these settings?
Yeah, there are challenges in cleaning and storing them, and less than 10% of women are allowed to use menstrual cups around the world, sometimes because of lack of water and the ability to sanitize them and clean them, but sometimes because of religious reasons or cultural beliefs. Sometimes inserting anything into the vagina is considered it's not acceptable. Let's just put it that way. For whatever reason, it can be religious reasons, cultural reasons. So less than 10% to answer your question. And I think that has to be taken into consideration with cups as well as the washable pads. If you don't have adequate water and soap to clean them, they shouldn't be distributed because you can do more harm than good, right? You don't want dirty pads or pads that aren't dried all the way put back in your underwear and using them because now you have yeast infections, for example, right? So it has to be considered. Yeah. And we take all of that into consideration. And I also want to mention that there are a lot of countries around the world, including Uganda, for example, South Africa, that have now come up with washable standards, business washable standards. They've tested them. They've tested how you adequately clean them, how much water needs to be used, how are they made, where are they made, what are the conditions like in the facilities where they're made to keep women healthy and safe. So that's the good news, is that we're starting to see washable standards put into place as well.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Asim. How can menstrual equity be promoted in patriarchal societies where there's a significant stigma around menstruation, limiting open discussions about it? And what strategies can be employed to overcome these cultural barriers?
Yeah, we face it all the time, all over the world. And that one of the ways we do this is to fold in male allies, because we recognize that by having male allies, that's how we're going to make long-term systemic change. And what you'll see, I'll give you an example. What you often see is that you make baby steps. So, we've gone into schools, for example, in Africa, where we want to deliver health education. We sit down, we've tried to sit down, this was a couple years ago, with our flip charts. This is the curriculum that we're going to use, and this is what we're going to teach. And the males would get up and leave the room. I'm just going to leave you here with the female teachers. Slowly but surely, they would stand in the back of the room and they would watch the training, and they saw the changes that were happening just in posture, that knowledge, that celebratory effect that we see that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then they're in the room watching, and then they're advocating for us, right? So it's baby steps, it's folding in male allies, and really not expecting things to change overnight. We're talking about deeply rooted cultural practices that have been in place for years and years and years. So patience is a virtue, and education.
Definitely. Definitely. And allyship, that's a key word. We have another question from Natalie. How has global action towards menstrual equity aligned or not with donor funding available for other health areas, for example, HIV, contraceptive access? And have you seen it part of the conversation, or has it been left out?
Yeah, specifically from where I sit and my personal experience with the nonprofits that I've worked with and the grant writing, we have a tendency to stay in our lane. Unless we're writing a grant with another organization that specifically focuses on HIV, let's just take that for example. If we were to write a grant that looks at the whole WASH spectrum, water, sanitation, hygiene, which also is inclusive of education like HIV training, for example, we typically would not look at that and fold that into a grant. It's better for nonprofits to stay in their lane and do what they do well, and to partner with other organizations that specialize in other areas. So collaboration is great and important. I don't think that HIV is being discarded. For example, we're making great strides in HIV. There are organizations that are helping to eradicate HIV in countries like Eswatini, for example, where they thought the entire population was going to die. And it's not, right? They're not, and they're thriving in many ways. In many ways, they're not. But there are organizations that are doing great work in those areas. We just have a tendency to either write grants together or stay in our lane. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. looks like we have a couple more questions left. Thank you so much for giving us these thoughtful answers. We have a question from Parvati. You mentioned briefly about Days for Girls, which is a nonprofit in Washington. Any other nonprofits you'd recommend for those of us who may be interested in volunteering? What other nonprofits in the menstrual equity space do you recommend we look into funding, especially those working in LMICs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm partial to Days for Girls because that's who I've worked with for 10 years, and there are a lot of nonprofits that are doing great work in this space. If you're specifically interested in the U.S., for any of you that are partial to what's happening here in our own country, period.org does a fantastic job supporting women and girls here domestically in the US. There are many organizations worldwide, like the Water Sanitation Hygiene Fund. AfriPads is another organization that specifically supports Africa. I mean, truly, it depends on if you're interested in a specific country. Are you interested in a specific area? I'm happy to point you in the right direction if you have, a keen interest in a particular area. You can email me at April@daysforgirls or April@MiDOViA.com, and I'm happy to help point you in the right direction. There's just so many organizations out there. I hate to just call out a few.
Thank you. And it looks like our last question is what about refugees? And that's a question coming from Elena.
And I'm not sure exactly what the question is relative to refugees, so I'll try to answer here. I'll just guess at what you're asking here. Are we supporting refugees in this area? And the answer is yes. Refugees are a huge part of our work and other nonprofit work. There are a lot of humanitarian relief efforts that are happening with global crises around the world. Even today, over the years, we've supported refugees. We like to call them displaced versus refugees. Oftentimes, what you see with assistance with IDPs is that we distribute hybrid kits versus just the washable kits because there's a high mobility rate with them initially, especially in humanitarian crises situations. As you can imagine, they're very mobile. And so what we do is we partner with other organizations that are on the ground. We don't try to go in ourselves. We have really strong relationships with organizations that go in and take those hybrid kits. And when I say hybrid, I mean that they might have a washable pad and a liner, a few disposables, soap, panties, that type of thing, just to see what she might need. And then we come back in and distribute what's needed later, or we'll come back in once they have more permanent situation and distribute the washable, sustainable options for them so that we're not having to redistribute, time and time and time again. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. I hope that it does. And it definitely is important to provide people with the products that they need. If we're giving out menstrual cups, but people only use pads. I know when you said culturally sticking things up your vagina is considered, unacceptable. And I resonate with that because some parts of our culture, experience the same thing. I wasn't allowed to use tampons growing up, but now as you learn more about them, as you talk more about them, you start to understand that, a tampon is just there. It doesn't really mean anything else. But thank you, April. Thank you for generously giving us your time today to speak about menstrual equity with us. And I've learned so much from today's event, and I'm sure our attendees have as well. So now I would like to pass the mic to our Women in Global Health Seattle advisor, Julian, for some announcements regarding our chapter.
Thank you. Thank you, April, again. We are really joyful in such quarterly events. It's quite enjoyable to hear some of great stories like this about menstrual equity. We want to make sure that there are more ways for us to stay connected, to keep getting abreast with some of these important topics. For those of you who are interested in being part of the WGA Seattle events, please make sure you subscribe to our mailing list and also stay connected via LinkedIn. We have a page, the WGH Seattle on LinkedIn. We also would like you to sign up for the 2024 small groups, where we have special topics centered around those groups. The links are in the chat, I believe. And then if you please make sure that you spare some time and fill out the survey that is also in the chat. This is a way we can gather data on our chapter, the WGH Seattle chapter membership. And then it also supports us in securing additional funding to fund some of the activities that we have. And this concludes the formal programming for today's event. Thank you all very much for joining us. Make sure you fill up I see it's on the screen and the chat as well, the survey. Thank you and bye.